Welcome to another introduction video of TEST.easy. In this video, I will give you a brief overview over our test automation tools for SAP. My name is Lukas Briel and I am developer at TEST.easy. Before I guide you through the process of creating and executing a test case in TEST.easy, let's first have a look at TEST.easy's structure and terminology. The first step is always to define and configure our tests. TEST.easy always executes a whole test set containing at least one, but usually several test scenarios. The execution of a test set is called test run. After it's finished, the test run yields the test run protocol. That tells you how your test went, which scenarios were successful and which may have failed. Each of those test scenarios consists of multiple test cases. A test case can be viewed as one step of the test execution, and it may be calling a program, a function module, or, like in our case, replaying a pre-recorded transaction using batch input. Note that TEST.easy provides a lot more options than the three that are shown here. You can learn more about those in upcoming videos. So without further ado, let's jump into TEST.easy. You will find TEST.easy in your Easy Access menu under the Tools folder. First, we are going to open the scenario application in order to create a scenario with one test case. At the top, you find the Scenarios head area. Here you can search for existing scenarios and maintain general information about the current scenario, such as the description or which product and/or module the scenario belongs to. These fields let you put the scenario into the context of your application lifecycle management. You can reference the requirement or the defect or any other external object that the scenario might stem from, along with their respective descriptions. On the right-hand side, you find some information about when and by whom the scenario was last changed and/or activated. The middle part shows all the test cases of the selected scenario. The more complicated your test specification is, the more test cases you'll probably need. For the purposes of this video, we'll just need one test case. So in order to create one, we first need to switch into edit mode and then create our first scenario. We'll provide a fitting description. Note that all these other fields in the head area are optional, so right now we don't need to bother filling out more information and instead can continue with creating our first test case. Each test case has its own description, and the test object determines what is being tested. TEST.easy comes with a variety of different test object types, each providing a different access to hook into your source code for testing. Today, we only focus on the batch input type. Batch input is an SAP tool to record and replay transactions. The example for this video is going to be the transaction FB01 that lets you post documents manually. After setting up the test object, we can now generate the configuration interface for this test case. The batch input test object generates its interface by recording the transaction being executed. So right here we can adjust some recording options, but we'll just keep the default settings, and then we'll start recording. This is the first screen of our transaction, where I can fill out all the necessary information about the document that I'm about to post. When I hit enter, the system will probably notify me that this isn't the current fiscal year, but we don't care about that right now. And here I can edit the first line of the document. After hitting enter again, I can now edit the amount and some additional information for the first line item. Now I'm going to prepare the second line item. Enter the amount for the second line item. And now let's post this document and finish this transaction, and with that, the batch input recording as well. The progress indicator down there tells you that TEST.easy is now preparing the configuration interface, taking into account all our input during the recording. We're back now in TEST.easy's scenario application, where the bottom area that was previously empty now shows the configuration interface of our test object, divided into input and output. The input part may seem familiar to you, because it contains all those values we just entered in order to post that document. We're now free to modify this recording by exchanging any of those values. However, note that this might change the behavior of the transaction and therefore break the replay. The output part contains the validation rules for this test case. A validation rule defines what value is to be expected when running this case. The batch input object already provides some validation rules by default, but you could modify or even delete those to match your test specifications. A return value of 0 for a batch input object like this indicates that the recording has been replayed successfully. So if indeed the replay is broken due to some modification in the input part, TEST.easy would recognize this through a return value that deviates from the expected value of 0. Besides the return code, this test object also returns any messages that pop up during the replay. So with this default group condition, we are allowing this test case to have an arbitrary number of messages, from 0 to however many. The validation rule on the right-hand side means that we expect the message text of those potential messages just to not be empty. So in other words, we don't care how many messages the replay produces, but if there are any, they should have some text. Now that our scenario is set up, we'll save it, take note of the automatically generated scenario number, and jump right over to the test set application. The top area shows the header of the current set, while the bottom area shows its contents. We need to switch into edit mode again, create a new test set, enter a description, and can now add our scenario. Once the new test set is saved, we can execute it by clicking the Start Run button. This will open up a new screen that gives us quite some options to control the test execution. But we'll just keep the default settings and see what happens when we execute it. Batch input has the advantage of being able to run in the background. This is great if we want to schedule our test run as a background job. But now we won't actually see the replay of our recorded transaction. However, once the test run is finished, the protocol will show up where we can check if everything went smoothly. Again, at the top we find some header information about the test run, but the interesting part right now is the area below that tells us that our scenario was executed successfully. For further details, we'll have to look into the protocol tree. Here we find the expected value that was defined in the validation rule we looked at earlier. This value is compared to the actual value of this run. If they match, the comparison will show the status passed. If they didn't match, we would see a red symbol and the status text failed. Evidently, the replay went through successfully. Let's check if there were any messages popping up during the replay. The first thing we notice is that there were in fact 2 messages, both showing the other validation rule we looked at earlier, which was that the message text should not be empty, or in a rather technical notation, unequal to space. Both messages of course pass the validation because they do have a text. The first, again, remarking that this is not the current fiscal year, and the second, notifying us that the replay successfully created and posted a new document. This concludes today's introduction. I hope you enjoyed this video and don't miss out on our upcoming tutorials.